Welcome, everyone, to this month's Spirituality and Health seminar. And I'm so excited to be able to introduce to you Dr. Stephen Post. Dr. Stephen Post is professor of family medicine at Stony Brook, and he's director of a bunch of big institutes there. And more important than anything else, Stephen Post is one of my oldest and closest colleagues.
Yes.
Both oldest in terms of his age, and also in terms of the many years that we have worked together, dating back to the time of David Larson in the 1990s. So he's been such a good friend, and he's going to talk about humility and the science of inner peace. So Stephen, take it away.
Thank you, Harold. Yeah, we do go back a ways, and it's always been such a delight to work with you. And I'm very grateful to be on your platform this afternoon and speaking about the incredibly important idea of humility and the science of inner peace. This will be somewhat humanistic. I'm going to be philosophical at times, a little bit even theological, not overly so, but also bring to bear some of the scientific literature that we have. We actually don't have too much that goes beyond the common sense knowledge base that I think we all have, that somehow humility is important and even the baseline for all other empathic virtues. This is a little quote from Lao Tzu, the founder of Taoism. Water is the softest thing, yet it can penetrate mountains and earth. This shows clearly the principle of softness overcoming hardness. It's hard to disagree with that. And this is a Confucian statement about the value of humility, non-ego, caring for others, soft power, listening, encouraging loyalty, and so forth. I do think that in Chinese culture, but also Japanese, the virtue of humility is really quite expansive, and it's rather strongly unacceptable for anybody to be self-promotional, whether they're working in a corporation, in a hospital, on any kind of a team project. The idea of focusing on an individual in any way, shape, or form at the expense of the larger whole does not get you very far. In fact, most people I know from these traditions are readily embarrassed when I usually, as I do, point out their excellence. They don't want to even think about that. Humility is the solid foundation of all virtues. This is worth some reflection. I'm not sure what all of you will be thinking on this one, but it does seem to me that humility is core. If you look at this little comparison, humility admits mistakes, listens to understand, gives space, has an open mind, embraces differences, allows ideas to emerge, demonstrates patience, takes ownership, builds learning culture. And then on the other side of the coin is all this arrogance. The physicians, on average, interrupt patients after 17 seconds, which does not really contribute much to understanding or empathic care. And all of these things, frustration, fear. It's been said it's better to be always kind than always right. You probably know somebody somewhere in your life at some point who you wish would understand that a little more clearly than they do. It could even be a sibling, but it's better to be always kind than always right. This is from the Western side, Thomas Merton, who was a mystic and a Christian. In humility is the greatest freedom. This is an interesting comment. As long as you have to defend the imaginary self that you think is important, you lose your peace of heart. Just for a moment, reflect on how much effort it is to overstate your significance and to have to explain that to other people. It's a big job, and ontologically, it's really not true. This is a very nice image of humility. This is from Norman Rockwell. When I was a boy, I was about 14. I was up in Concord, New Hampshire, and Rockwell came in from Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and he gave a wonderful talk about his iconic image of the golden rule, which you can also find in mosaic form in the United Nations. This goes back to 1961. And he asked us boys sitting there in this New England school, what did we think about the facial expressions of these individuals? Well, some of my friends said, oh, they look sad, they look miserable. I said, I thought they looked humble. Now, maybe that's an attribution. But he liked that. And you see, they're all meditating on the positive version of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. A sharp contrast with the negative version of the rule, do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. That simply means that you all can get home this evening. And if you haven't elbowed some innocent person in the back, you can think that your life is justified. That doesn't require much. It's minimalism in ethics, but this is more idealism. It's asking you to use your moral imaginations to think, how can I contribute to the lives of others? And you can see that these individuals, at least I see it, with that kind of focus, and that's what certainly Rockwell was trying to convey, with that wonderful look, and they're asking themselves what they can do to help others. That's something that both Shakespeare and Picasso said is the actual purpose of life. There are people from every different color and culture and religion and age, gender, I assume, and some of these people you would, if I explained it to you, you'd probably recognize them. That the little girl on the left, very left side, right here, that black child is none other than Ruby Bridges, most famous for her civil rights activity in New Orleans when they opened up a segregated school, and she had her books under her arms. You can see the books right there behind her hands. Rockwell was fired, I must say, from the Saturday Evening Post for painting this, because they had a policy that you couldn't present Black people in other than trivializing poses. And this was hardly trivializing, so they fired him. And then he went to Look magazine immediately thereafter. And his first big cover was this amazing image of Ruby Bridges with several police officers escorting her into the school. So he was way ahead of his time. Again, this is 1961. He had a sense of a shared humanity and of cultural humility. And he didn't necessarily find that easy because it was so early on. But it's a beautiful story. And then I'm going to ask you all now, use your imaginations. Do you see the halo in this image? Those are the words that Rockwell asked us exactly. Do you see the halo in this image? Joni Mara, do you see it? Well, very few of us did, but he said it starts with this white beard, and it comes over here to the toddler's shirt, and then down to the socks, and then comes over here on the left and up in this direction. And what he said was that he was not a particularly religious man. I guess he was a nominal Episcopalian, but he was very spiritual, and he wanted to convey the energy of this kind of unselfish love, which has a kind of spiritual depth to it. He did believe that there is a kind of love that is something more than human love, something more dependable, something wiser, something more energetic, something more expansive. And he felt that we could be in touch with that. And that was the essence of spirituality. And he also felt that if we could get in touch with that, it would create more health, mental and physical. So he said those things. And that was back in 1968, I believe. So there you have it. And his final comment was, well, you know, the energy of that circle is kind of like, he was not a surfer, but he said, it's like if you're going surfing, you have to paddle very, very hard to catch the wave of do unto others. It takes a lot of arm strength, and you got to get on that wave. But at a certain point, you catch the wave, and all you have to do is stand up and balance. And so when you get into that energy of the inner circle, that's all you have to do. And he also said that, by the way, there are no boundaries to this image. He didn't want any boundaries. He just wanted to convey a shared, open humanity. So it is a very, very beautiful image. And clearly he associated it with humility. He said that, you know, you don't have to be puffing yourself up in life, although a lot of us feel that we need to do that. So you've got Ruby Bridges, you've got all that, by the way, is the artist himself in the denim jacket. So I won't go on about it, but some humility quotes. This I like a lot. It's from Iran. They weave in an imperfection in every Persian rug because God alone is perfect. How can we not be humble? It's interesting. C.S. Lewis actually wrongly attributed to him, although often attributed, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. So many people feel that humility is more or less a form of humiliation, and they're not interested in it at all. But it doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less, but nevertheless a fine quote. And then Sir John Templeton, who based his whole foundation and all of his writings on the concept of humility. In fact, the largest category in his grant making is called humility. He's passed away, of course, humility theology. And anything having to do with love and kindness and altruism comes under that rubric. So it is not humiliation. It's not self-humiliation. It's not de-dignification. It's not submission. It really comes from the word for earth. How many of you are gardeners? You enjoy, as soon as the spring comes, getting out there and planting behind the house. Tolkien often said that gardening enhances one's well-being, one's flourishing. You'll notice in the Lord of the Rings that Sam Gamgee is a gardener, and Sam, when he comes back from all those incredible adventures, so many of them dangerous as could be, he's able to settle back in the Shire, do his gardening. He marries a gal. They have a couple of babies. He's into the stuff of life, if you will, the material of life, even the gooey stuff of life, unlike those of us who live in these worlds of computer technology and imagery. Frodo, of course, he could not really get back to the Shire So at the end, he goes off on a ship with Gandalf and the elves, and we don't know exactly where he's going. But the thing is that he just felt unable to connect again with the Shire. So gardening at the end of Voltaire's Candide, after Candide's had all these wonderful ideas and done all sorts of crazy things with his life, everybody is just out in the garden and they're relatively happy. Frederick Olmsted, America's greatest landscape architect, struggled with severe depression. And he spent the last 5 years of his life at McLean in Boston. And as he said, I was saved by the gardens. He actually designed the 6 sister asylums in the 1870s and 80s across the East Coast: Philadelphia, Baltimore, the Connecticut Asylum, which is now the Institute for Living, which is a psychiatric campus for the University of Connecticut Medical School. Um, certainly McLean itself was his design, and he would have a couple of hundred acres because he really believed that it was necessary to reconnect with nature. And historically, most people who look back on his life think that he probably had schizophrenia, or at least a very clear schizoid disorder. So there was something that he understood about nature and humility and being close to the earth. And of course, so many other great figures, artists, and writers have understood that as well. This is Hopewell. Some of you from Ohio, I know there are 3 or 4 of you here. You've been out to Mesopotamia, Ohio, which is not the one in the Middle East. The the wonderful mother of a son who had these kinds of mental health issues. He'd gone to Princeton, then he was working in New York at Wall Street, and he just had this complete collapse. Came back to Cleveland, and actually had some conversation with his mom, and we talked about Harry Stack Sullivan, who was a very famous psychiatrist at the University of Chicago. I never met him, but I wrote a lot about him and I read a lot of his work, and I knew a lot of people who followed him. He was the most prolific and successful psychiatrist treating people with schizophrenia in American history. He'd gone to medical school in the early 30s, and he'd had a schizophrenic episode, and he went back to his little hometown in rural Vermont. And that's where he got better, because he knew the voices. He knew that little church steeple. It was familiar to him. And a lot of people think that schizophrenia is somewhat related to anxiety disorder, or what we could call separation anxiety in terms of attachment theory. We're thrown into this life. Everything is a surprise, and we have to try to attach to somebody. Many people have interpreted spirituality, including Greg Frishone, who's the head of the Benson Henry Mind Body Institute at Mass General and a great friend. Greg Frishone interprets spirituality and even the urge to connect with a higher being. He views all of that in terms of attachment theory, and wrote a beautiful book about it, which I think is something to consider. So when I think about this, I think about spirituality as a form of attachment, reattachment, and that's what is going on at Hopewell, I think. But with regard to nature, the cherishing of nature is such an important part of the Hopewell culture. It's about 350 acres. It was purchased from the Amish. And some of the Amish folks still work there. They have a little store on the corner where they sell arts and crafts that the residents create. There are at any point probably about 80 or 90 residents, people with mental health difficulties, again, mainly bipolar and schizophrenia, living there. And they do moral treatment. They actually do a lot of gardening, hence, the image of the garden and Sam Ganji. And it's quite helpful to them. There are people at Case Western who are now measuring this carefully. So they do gardening. Everybody has a positive treatment, a positive expectation in the community. So somebody's out baling the hay. Somebody is out combing the horse. They have an equestrian program. Somebody is maybe painting the barn. And then they have other opportunities to serve one another internal to the various structures of the place. And this was called moral treatment when Olmsted was forming these great asylums. This was before asylums were just places for passive behavior and wasted living. This was when asylums were really state of the art and brilliant. Olmsted thought a natural setting combined with positive, I'll use the expression positive psychology, although that didn't exist at the time, but positive behavior, pro-social behavior, that was crucial. And if you look now, the largest and most successful program for treating people with schizophrenia and bipolar is ARTA, the Residential Treatment Association. One of the first institutions involved in ARTA that really is kind of a founding institution is hopewell.cc. So this is really taken over. It's taken over internationally because, again, when I got here to Stony Brook from Cleveland, this is now 15 years ago, I sat at a coffee shop with a man whose son had a serious schizophrenic episode when he was 17, and he was in Pilgrim State, which still exists. And that's just a warehouse. And I said, why don't you talk with me about Hopewell? And eventually this fellow had some means. His son went out to Hopewell, and his son actually mostly recovered, and he's now quite functional. So there's something about community and nature that matters a lot. And when Olmsted, when he designed Central Park, which was his great lasting contribution, he said, and I quote, he said, "I hope that for hundreds of years, people in New York realize that in Central Park, they can find inner peace in cherishing nature. And they may not realize that the person who designed this for them and intended it for them was a man who many people refer to as schizoid. They didn't use the word schizophrenia back then, but the word schizoid was around. So there you have it, Olmsted, great, great hero. Now, you see this wooden table here on the upper right. You know what they're practicing there? Positive psychology. So I actually helped with this a little bit once upon a time. Positive psychology, as you all know, is being studied very carefully in clinical settings. The idea is that, for example, through gratitude, as the New York Times reported some years ago, adolescents, just by spending 20 minutes reflecting in a journal on the few things they're most grateful for, they become happier by happiness scales. They're less prone to depression and anxiety. And then you can take a week on gratitude, and then you can shift to kindness, and then you can shift to forgiveness, and then you can shift to humility. And that's what they do here. And it's a very, very beautiful thing. And it's very, very, very healing. And I will just tell you one quick thing is that, sorry, I'm going to reach over here. I can remember when Sir John Templeton wrote his great classic, I don't know if you can see this or not, The Essential Worldwide Laws of Life. And I wrote the foreword for it. And Sir John, who I was happily very close to, this is all based on wisdom literature. Practice forgiveness, embrace humility, share love, find joy, celebrate success. Sir John wanted great scientists to bring the methods of science and public health and medical science to these great strengths, because everything to date had been focused on disease. Well, beautifully, Arthur Schwartz and a few of us got him together at the Marriott Hotel in downtown Philadelphia with Martin E.P. Seligman, who up until that point had been mainly known for learned helplessness, dogs who have lost all hope and can't even get up off the floor, if you will. But Marty was beginning to turn the corner, and Marty wanted to do things that were more positive. And I love Marty. And so that was a match made in heaven, because they got together. And then, by the year 2000, Sir John was funneling tremendous amounts of money for the birth of positive psychology. And wow, it's taken off. It's probably the most widely funded area of psychological science in the world today. At that time, there were probably, we counted them up, there were 4 published articles on forgiveness in psychology and health journals. Now there are thousands, and there's a dedicated journal so that people like Julie Exline at Case Western in psychology get tenured based on forgiveness research. That would have been unheard of before all this happened. So humility and kindness. This is a Long Island blowfish down here, okay? You catch them and then they just blow up like a balloon. You can practically play baseball with them if you want. But we have a tendency to inflate ourselves. And in many traditions, certainly the words of Lao Tzu suggest this, but in Christianity and Judaism and all the great traditions of spirituality, it is this tendency towards self-inflation that makes kindness and love impossible, because you fill up the room. There's no room left for anybody else. Have you ever known anybody like that? And so Sir John definitely felt that humility is the mother of all virtue, and I tend to agree with him. This is a little picture of how attentive listening, love sucks, just entertainment value. The ethics of equal regard has so much to do with humility. Martin Buber, I, thou, not I, it. There are really, for Buber, 2 basic ways to live your life. I, it, I'm the center of the universe, and I relate to other people only insofar as they contribute to my little agendas. And then I, thou, I discover the other as a true center of value, the thou-ness of the other. Of course, you can go a little further than that. If you're in the Hindu tradition, you can say namaste. I went with Dr. Joe Foley, a great neurologist, to a psychiatric clinic for older adults in Mount Vernon, Ohio, many years ago. And there was, believe it or not, a community of Hindu nurses aides living in that middle area of Ohio. It was kind of surprising. And Joe and I went into the hospital, and there was a wing devoted to people who had Down syndrome and who were really in their late 40s and 50s. And in that age group, Alzheimer's is ubiquitous, actually. So these are people who have what's called a double diagnosis, the dual diagnosis. And it's difficult for parents because every threshold of development and success is in reverse now. So they see this kind of development in reverse. And these individuals, a lot of them have behavioral difficulties. So it's very difficult to care for them. But these wonderful Hindu nurses, they were so diligent. Their tone of voice, their use of language, their use of touch. A couple of weeks ago, we did an article on touch in JAMA, which has gotten a lot of attention. But their use of touch was so subtle and so spiritual. And so Joe and I took a couple of these nurses out to lunch at a pizza restaurant in Gambier, Ohio, which was nearby. That's where Kenyon College is. And it's the only restaurant they had as a pizza place. And we asked them, so why do you care so beautifully and so softly for these individuals? It's not easy. And they said, namaste, meaning I honor the divine in you. Technically, I honor the divine in all of us. So that's beyond I and thou. It's the universal divine. It's the one mind, if you will, that which all of our minds share. So it's very beautiful stuff. Equal regard has so much to do with that level of humility that we saw in those wonderful nurses. Sir John's laws of life: gratitude, kindness, honesty, service, humility, perseverance, patience, future mindedness, thrift, forgiveness. He was the greatest guy I think I ever met. And this was all translated directly in 2000, 2001. I was actually at the first positive psychology forum formation stage at Seligman Center. And we had wonderful people there. We had Bob Emmons, the sort of the guru of gratitude. We had, I won't even name people, but we had George, the great psychiatrist from Harvard. It was incredible. And we came up with this idea of a handbook of positive psychology with humility really central to it. And everybody was contributing chapters, and this was eventually published by the American Psychological Association, and it became the basis of a movement that has changed the world, literally changed the world. Even in this modern day hospital where I am, where psychiatrists are so busy treating mental illness, they are tremendously interested now in positive psychology and how they can use it to prevent various problems. Our psychiatry emergency room is just completely full almost every night. It's something about the world we live in. It's the anxiety. It's the acrimony. It's the tension of our culture. Our age of anxiety, as W.H. Auden wrote the book. And positive psychology is making its way into psychiatry. I'm calling it positive psychiatry here. But that's so important. Manifestations of humility. There's intellectual humility. Down the street here, there's a little town called Huntington, and there was a woman named Barbara McClintock who'd gone to Cornell. She was a plant biologist, and she actually got the Nobel Prize at Cold Spring Harbor. Why? Because she figured out all the details of cell division, looking very, very carefully through electron microscopy. This is 40 years ago. She was a genius. And you know what? Every morning she meditated, and she meditated about humility before nature. And then she would drive over to Cold Spring Harbor, and she didn't follow any of the methodologies that were sort of commonplace at the time among the big geneticists. She just used humble, inductive observation. And she wrote essays about humility and science. And if we would just pay more attention to those details, we could learn so much. This eventually became known as feminist epistemology because it spread throughout the feminist movement. She was great. I had the honor of meeting her once. She's passed away now. Fred Robbins, Nobel Prize laureate at Case Western, head of the National Academy of Medicine. That guy would be in the halls of the medical school early in the morning, and as people walked in, he'd just be standing there and available to them. It didn't matter who it was. It could be anybody at all, whatever their tasks, their jobs, and he would just bring them into his office if he thought they could use some counseling. There's interpersonal humility. Jimmy Carter, I was I was down at the Carter Center doing a talk on Alzheimer's once upon a time. I was there with Jenny Helms. And lo and behold, we were standing behind the car about to get some boxes out that we had to bring into the Carter Center. And in a very quiet way, somebody walked up behind us and said, "Could I possibly be helpful?" And we turned around and it was Jimmy Carter. So, Paul Farmer, same kind of reputation. Cicely Saunders, we had Cicely Saunders, who was the foundress of the hospice movement, to our first conference on unlimited love at MIT in the fall of 1999. And she said, I still get up every morning. I'm 83 years old. I get up every morning and I go into St. Christopher's Hospice. That's the hospice she personally founded in the suburbs of London. And I changed bedpans. She'd been a nurse before she became a doctor, by the way. I changed bedpans. And she said, because it teaches me humility and the honor of serving these patients. And then she said, I sit on the end of their beds and I ask them, what are the things in their lives that have been most meaningful? And I just humbly listen. She said, I humbly listen. She said, you can't be a good listener unless you're humble. So humility is everywhere. It really is, as Lao Tzu said, it's like the water. Actually, the water is the symbol of humility in Chinese culture and thought. You depend on the water. We all depend on water, but it takes the lowest place. The water goes to the lowest spot on the floor because that's its nature. Cultural humility is a huge thing now in medical ethics and in clinical ethics consultations that we do. How can we really get to a point where we honor and respect people from a different culture than our own? That's a hard one. That's Barbara McClintock. She was fantastic. She did all her work, by the way, on corn. From Reinhold Niebuhr, the serenity prayer that is read at the beginning of all AA meetings, sometimes called the humility prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That takes humility. My favorite Niebuhr quote, the children of light must have the cunning of the children of darkness, but none of their malice. So we had a huge project called Helping Others Live Sober. And the fourth step, for those of you who have ever observed an AA meeting, make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So you have your sponsor next to you. I've just observed this and written articles about it. And you're supposed to focus on the interaction that you feel was most problematic in recent years, the thing that really set you off in the wrong direction, that you obsess with, that you ruminate over. And then your sponsor asks you, but do you think that you might have contributed to that problem? That it wasn't all them? That's arrogance in AA language. It's all them. But if you think in those terms, you really can't overcome your alcoholism. So you write a paragraph or even a page about how you contributed to these problems. And that's one of the core, we did a lot of studies on this, is one of the core features of recovery from alcoholism. I mean, humility, I cannot solve my problems myself. So people turn to a higher power, which could be the organization itself. But the real crux of it comes here with step 4. And then the final step, that's where you help others, especially people with alcoholism. So that's the wounded healer, as Henri Nouwen liked to put it, the wounded healer effect, that you can know a lot about helping other people, even if you're not formally trained, because you've been there and you've experienced things. So yeah, this is definitely the best humility scale. It's more focused on intellectual humility, but just take a look at this. My ideas are usually better than other people's. For the most part, others have more to learn from me than I have to learn from them. I have a very loving relative who I care about a lot, but I got to tell you, you know, she has never learned this. Okay. So I bet everybody has someone like that in their life. When I'm really confident in a belief, there is very little chance that the belief is wrong. I'd rather rely on my own knowledge about most topics than turn to others for expertise. I won't read through all of these. On important topics, I'm not likely to be swayed by the viewpoints of others. At times, I've changed opinions that were important to me when someone showed me I was wrong. Listening to perspectives of others seldom changes my important opinions. Even when I disagree with others, I can recognize they have sound points. This is all about civility and listening to others and honoring other perspectives. And I got to tell you, you know, as a professor in a medical school over the years, for many years now, I worry about this because I think so many folks have never really been taught. I do this in all my classes. I have the students defend a position that they personally disagree with. And then they have debates, and they're responsible to honorably and as best they can present the viewpoints of others, even views that they find to be antagonistic. They have to be objective, clear, and do an appropriate job. And we grade them on that because we want them to be able to take the viewpoint of the other. When someone contradicts my most important beliefs, it feels like a personal attack. I can respect others even if I disagree with them in important ways. These things are really important. So what are some humility tips just to put in your back pocket? Know thyself, moral inventory. That's so important. The AA thing is so great. Appreciate others and take advice. Seek guidance. Apologize when fitting. In AA, you're expected to apologize to people you've offended, again, as appropriate and as operational, because relationships can be very complex. Listen a lot before you talk. Life is a journey. You don't make your life. That's one of the most arrogant ideas I can imagine. When I was at Chicago, I had the opportunity to study for a long time with Joseph Campbell, who would visit half the year. And he wrote about the spiritual journey. And life is a journey. So in a journey, he would say, don't think you make your life. He said, that's the worst arrogance imaginable. You're on a journey and you're encountering all kinds of unexpected events, unexpected individuals. And on that journey, your job is to respond in humility and integrity to what you meet along the way. You didn't make that, except by virtue of your humility, your ability to take other people into account. And that's certainly my life. You know, I do a lot with Alzheimer's disease, and I didn't make that myself. I met a number of people, including my grandmother, who probably passed away of Alzheimer's when they still called it senile dementia. Or maybe at Chicago, I ran into Sir John Eccles, who was a great physiologist and won the Nobel Prize for figuring out all the basic structures of synapses. So life is a journey. I'm never convinced that I did much for my life, and I accept that. But I'm a good responder. Better to be always kind than always right. I used that statement a little bit earlier. So on self-reported experience, we did a book, the late Margaret Paloma and Matt Lee, who's running the current human flourishing study. $46 million study funded a lot by Templeton and Fetzer and others. We did a survey of 1,208 adult men and women from across the US. It was randomized. And we wanted to get more of a sense. Whether they were churched or not was irrelevant, or any commitments to a religious body was not relevant. We wanted to know, have you experienced divine love? And we left that for them to define. And actually, it was amazing. 8 out of 10 Americans reported that they felt God's love directly, and that it increases their compassion for others. Previous surveys had not picked up the centrality of experiencing a loving God in the lives of benevolent people. By the way, people say religion is good for your health. I don't agree with that if your image of God is punishing. I mean, I've known patients who refused take chemotherapy that likely would have benefited them greatly because they thought they were being punished by God for something they did X years ago. But in general, if you have a compassionate, loving God in mind, religion is very helpful. That's an important caveat. So then what did we find out? So almost half of all Americans feel God's love at least once a day. This is a Likert scale. And 8 out of 10 have this experience at least once in a while. 81 of the respondents acknowledged that they experienced God's love as the greatest power in the universe. 83% indicate that they feel God's love increasing their compassion for others. 53% claiming this is an experience they have on most days or more often. And this gets really amazing. They report a stronger sense of purpose related to this experience of God's love. And there's a certain percentage, it's smaller, a certain percentage who feel this love constantly, all the time. So maybe it's 7 or 8%. I can't remember the exact figure, but they're feeling it all the time. And they also speak about humility. They speak about the relationship between the spiritual sense of a divine presence, a higher presence, if you will, and compassion, strengthening of compassion, the sense of calling, and so many other things. So this this came out some few years ago, The Heart of Religion. Matt Lee was the first author. He did most of the work, but Margaret Paloma, both from the University of Akron at that time, and myself with Oxford, The Heart of Religion. It's the only study that's ever been done quite of its type. So I'm going to stop sharing now, I think. Stop share. And then I should see you all. Hello. Okay. And I've probably given some of you something to talk about. I'm the most open-minded guy, and any question, any criticism is always welcome. Harold knows that. Also, tasteful jokes are fine.
Okay. Anybody can just unmute yourself and ask Stephen a question.
And Harold can help out.
I love you, man. You're an amazing guy. Thank you.
And Jade Angelica. Hi, Jade. How are you?
Very well. And I just want to say I was really taken by your comment, Stephen, about being a good responder.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's how I've come to know you.
Thank you. So, we met like probably 25 years ago at Andover Newton Theological School in Boston, now closed, I guess. But you went on to, in my opinion, be one of the most important practitioners, workshop leaders, and writers on what I refer to as deeply forgetful people. I don't like the word dementia. I think it's demeaning. I It's structured like the word retard, and we don't run around calling people retarded. So, thank you for writing that wonderful segment on communication and deeply forgetful people, and on your own book, which I know is coming out because someone from your press contacted me for a forward, and I certainly said yes immediately.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been just a joy working with you, learning from you.
But how about humility in relationship to your care of deeply forgetful people? I mean, that's got to be something in your heart, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And,
Hey,
you know,
Steve.
we don't share hypercognitive values. You don't think I'm better than somebody else because of my cognitive dexterity. You know, we look at people as His Holiness points out. We value people for their consciousness. They can still smell the apple pie. They can still connect with the leaves in the fall. They can still respond to music and so many different things, and a smile. So that's humility. You have to have humility even before people who are highly, deeply forgetful.
They can teach us. They can teach us a lot.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, great. Anyone else? Jeff?
Yeah, Stephen, hi. We've met before, I think. And anyway, one of the things that you mentioned that really gave me some pause was the association with good listening with humility. That having humility enables you to be a good listener, I think is how you had put it. And I was just thinking about how in everything that I've read and talked to people about as a physician, to listen to your patients, never has that ever come up, that it's really a function of humility.
Mhm.
I can understand why not in our profession, but I think that it's something to be taught to medical students that I had never thought about before.
It
At
is.
least,
And when we did that professional identity formation statement, we included humility. And Thomas Ingelfinger, who was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, he wrote a classic article called The Virtue of Arrogance. Physician arrogance. So, you know, you're right on target. You know, and as Jack Coulihan has written, you know, humility is not a virtue that you necessarily associate with the clinician. Sorry, Harold. It's just somewhat counterintuitive because you think of the clinician as not wanting to acknowledge uncertainty, the ethics of uncertainty, and so forth. So Jeff is one of my colleagues here and one of my favorite people here, and I'm honored that you're taking the time to listen in.
well, I also found that so many of the people, the physicians, who I have admired the most over the years, have always exemplified a humility.
Yeah.
And I really think it's an important thing. Thank you for an excellent.
Can I ask I'm a little overwhelmed by this group of so many smart thinkers. I'm a retired Army chaplain that deployed with infantry units, and I've been doing trauma, and I'm an educator and all that stuff. But here's my question, and everybody has thought I was insane, but maybe you will understand. The energy that you say is the love that is at the bottom of the world. Well, what happened in an infantry unit in combat when a bunch of people are killed? This energy explodes.
Mhm.
Now it's not like the material energy; it's the spiritual energy.
Yes.
And soldiers will say that that experience, if you talk to them privately, you know, when they can be honest, is what drove them mad. And so what I'm really interested in is, and I worked in the hospital where some of that energy also, but in more measurable ways that we can contain. Is anybody doing any study on that? Like the reverse of what you're saying with the energy? Thank you for.
Well, I'd be curious, I think we could use more investigation of healing energy, if you will. Jeff Levin, one of the great epidemiologists, is writing a book right now. I see Harold shaking his head on energy healers, and probably the more we can learn about that, the better, and then we can kind of turn it in other directions. But but thus far, is there anything terribly good? I'm not as up on that as I could be, but I do want it. But speaking of energy, okay, there's one thing. This is my favorite passage in modern literature, and it's by W.H. Auden, if I can find it. Okay. I'm struggling to find this. But anyway, Auden was teaching at a prep school outside of Oxford. And he's sitting there on the lawn with his friends. They're not drinking. And he describes this incredible feeling of, he uses the metaphor of invasion. He says he's been invaded by this beautiful energy. And he doesn't see it, but he feels it. And for the first time in his life, he says, he knows what it really means to love your neighbor as yourself. So since I'm unembarrassable, as my wife says, I'm here in my office at Stony Brook. I had a student come in here 8 years ago, and she was from Queens, and she was dropping out of medical school. And I'd never met her before, but she knocked on my door and she said, I really need to talk to you. Somehow she found my office, and I said, what's up? She told me she was leaving medical school. And I said, wait a minute, let's talk. And she said, well, I need to talk to you now. So I canceled all my appointments for that afternoon. And I said, sit down, and we talked. And the reason I did that was because as I was thinking about sort of shuffling her off to next week, I felt an energy over my right shoulder. And it was quite weird, actually. I mean, I didn't see anything. I don't have hallucinations, but I felt an energy. I looked back over my shoulder, and somehow it felt like an energy of love. And that's what really made me turn my attention to her. And then my wife, Mitsuko, and I, for the next year, we would drive into Queens on 25A, and we would take this young lady out to a Korean restaurant and make sure she was doing okay. And she did process style psychological writing for the whole year, and she published her stuff. And then she eventually came back to do her residency in preventive medicine right here in Stony Brook. And now she's practicing medicine in Darien, Connecticut, and has a beautiful family. So in that case, and her mother, she never met her father in her life, but her mother was a maid in some houses along the Queens Boulevard. They had nothing. And I thought to myself, if it was not for that feeling that I'd had that early afternoon, maybe her life would have been lost. How's that grab you, Harold?
Everything you're saying, Stephen, is grabbing me.
Okay. Someone else, comment. We have maybe a minute or two. I think we have to wind up at 1 o'clock.
Yep. Dale, do you have a question?
Well, thank you, Harold. I don't recall Stephen, you addressing any research that has been done using a humility scale on the impact or relationship between humility and well-being, physical, mental well-being. Could you address that, or Harold?
Well, others can address it too. But there is material out there. I didn't try to cover everything. But part two would be much more empirical.
Okay. Harold, do you know of anybody else that's doing research in that area?
I don't. It seems like you've got a scale there. Stephen showed you a scale.
Yeah.
You could certainly do a study very easily looking at the connection with well-being. I'm pretty sure there'd be a positive connection.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the talk.
Can I leave? I have one paragraph, it's very brief to read, and then I'll let you go. Okay. It's Auden. I finally found it in this book. One fine night in June 1933, I was sitting on a lawn after dinner with 3 colleagues, 2 women and 1 man. We liked each other well enough, but were certainly not intimate friends, nor had any one of us a sexual interest in another. Incidentally, we had not drunk any alcohol. We were talking casually about everyday matters when quite suddenly and unexpectedly something happened. I felt myself invaded by a power which, though I consented to it, was irresistible and certainly not mine. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly, because thanks to the power I was doing it, what it means to love one's neighbor as oneself. I was also certain through the conversation, though the conversation continued to be perfectly ordinary, that my 3 colleagues were having the same experience. In the case of one of them, I later confirmed this. And here's the clutch line. My personal feelings toward them were unchanged. They were still colleagues, not intimate friends, but I felt their existence asked themselves to be of infinite value, and I rejoiced in it.
Wow.
That's W.H. Auden, and he wrote, and just in response to Dale, he wrote the great book, his classic, The Age of Anxiety. In fact, the whole idea of the Age of Anxiety is Auden's creation. And he certainly believed, and he expressed it poetically, that humility and love were the only responses to a culture of anxiety. And I'll tell you, when I pop by the psychiatric emergency room on weekend nights, sometimes just to look around, I got to tell you that I think he was right.
Love casts out fear.
It does. It does. That's right. That's right. Okay.
We're going to have to stop, but we could go on for the rest of the afternoon, but I know we all have commitments. Thank you all for participating in this seminar. And Stephen, can't thank you enough for everything you've said today.
If you want to sign up to my newsletter, it's Stephen with a PH, gpost.com. You